Joining us to discuss our panelist, Rick Green, founder of PatriotAcademy.com. He's here with us. Also, conservative commentator Rebecca Walzer, president of the Walzer Wealth Management Group. And finally, Joe Collins, former Republican congressional candidate and also a U.S. Navy veteran. Great to see our panelists today. Excited to have these conversations. They're important to do so. Again, important to highlight all elements of the story. The fact that we are seeing violence play out following, again, the shooting death of Daunte Wright. Keep in mind, this took place only 10 miles away from what's happening also in Minneapolis, the Derek Chauvin trial. It's expected to wrap up sometime soon. But Rick Green, we'll start with you here. How do you see this playing out? Do you think things could end peacefully, depending on the verdict of that trial, and then also considering this recent shooting that we've seen with Daunte Wright? Your thoughts?
Well, unfortunately, it looks like Minnesota officials are once again just caving to the mob, trying to appease violence. Listen, we need to actually get in the time machine and go back 60 years ago when there was actual systemic racism against blacks in some areas of America. And MLK wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail, and he gave us 4 very important steps before we protest. And number 1 was always to investigate, to gather the facts, he said, and make sure there was an injustice. And then to negotiate and try to get what you want. In this case, I guess, an indictment of the police officer. So we got what we wanted, I guess, if we're a protester. And then third, purification, to make sure that our heart is right when we go out and protest. And then finally, protest. We're skipping all of those steps, very little investigation, very little gathering of the facts to know who this was, were they fleeing from the police officers, what actually happened in this situation, and then to investigate further and find out if it truly was an accident by this police officer. So I just hate seeing the violence in immediate reaction rather than following the advice of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
There's so much to unpack here, Joe. One, you do have this narrative of again, a peaceful protest. 24 arrests last night, I believe 40 the night before, more than 20 businesses either destroyed or looted. And there's video of all of it. It really takes a Google search to see what happened so far. And a lot of it is made up, again, the argument about race, despite watching the body cam footage, as horrible as it is to watch, as unfortunate as this should have never obviously happened. But again, race coming into play in this specific instance. Joe Collins, your thoughts on that in seeing what's being dubbed peaceful, obviously turning violent?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good morning. Yeah, unfortunately, the Democrats have normalized violent protest, and they called it peaceful protest, just the same as they diluted the definition of racist. I mean, you can be racist, I can be a racist, just depending on what we say or how we think or if we don't agree with the narrative. But this is, how things have become. It's extremely polarizing. We cannot take the negligence of one officer and say that it was racism. If she made a mistake or if she didn't make a mistake, it's on the officer's fault. But at the end of the day, I have to place the blame on the legislators in that city. I mean, we're talking about Minnesota that has a police brutality rate against its citizens at 13% higher than any other state. But the blame here needs to get placed not only on an officer for her negligence, but on the city officials who have failed to pass any type of police reform legislation.
As you say, the officer, Kim Potter, will be facing charged with second-degree manslaughter here. Meanwhile, in a separate story, separate incident here, again, that January 6th Capitol riot there, a U.S. Capitol police officer has been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing for fatally shooting Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt at the Capitol during the riots. The name of the officer, I don't believe, has been released at this time. Now, this has gotten different reactions online based on whether or not people believe the officer should be charged or not. And I'm curious to hear from our panelists. Rebecca, we'll start with you. How are you viewing both of these incidents and how they've been charged or not charged?
Well, I'm not a criminal attorney, but I am an attorney, so I do know a bit about criminal law. And I will say that I think manslaughter could be the appropriate charge. It's second degree. I'm talking specifically about Kim Potter now. It's second degree, so this means that it's not an intentional act, and manslaughter in and of itself has no premeditation. So it's an accident, and I think that that is the appropriate charge. I don't know if she'll be found guilty, but it seems like it was an accident. She actually physically yelled taser as far as the January 6th Capitol riot and Ashley Babbitt, which is such a tragedy for our country, and I do understand people look at these situations and they say, wait, I don't understand. We don't even know the name of the officer that was involved in the January 6th event. But what I will say is, from the video that we can see, that the statement coming out, right, is that she was walking through a barricaded area that was apparently a broken window through a door, and that the officer yelled stop, and that she continued forward, and that was when she was shot. I don't appreciate either circumstance. As a country, we mourn for both of these circumstances, but you can see how during the actual January 6th event, I won't call it a riot, but during the actual January 6th event, how the authorities could say that they were not going to pursue charges on an officer who told someone to stop coming through a barricade. Although I disagree, it needed the use of lethal force, and that was the question. And so these are disparate circumstances, and we have to just, as a country, heal. We can't be, I agree with Joe's point, we can't be so willing and ready to just have a riot, destroy businesses that are completely unrelated. Anytime somebody makes a mistake, we are humans. We are not policed by robots. Thank God we are not policed by robots, and that does mean that human errors come into play sometimes.
Yeah, but it still goes back to that. I mean, it's an apparent double standard. How many people know about Ashley Babbitt? It's kind of been, as far as media coverage goes, it's kind of been swept under the rug. Who's the officer? The Department of Justice, they haven't released the name, but that officer's name gets released in any officer-involved shooting. They found there was no wrongdoing. Anyone on this panel, correct me if I'm wrong, Ashley Babbitt was not the only one to enter that Capitol building. Why was she the only one to lose her life? I mean, if you're going to let that officer off the hook, and again, I'm not an attorney and nowhere close to it, but common sense is telling me, hey, if it was okay for that officer to shoot her dead right there in the scene, why didn't they just open fire on everyone coming in the building? Clearly, that shouldn't have ever been the standard. You should have went through the entire justice process, and that didn't happen. And it's such a gray area around Ashley Babbitt, and now more people are asking questions about it, which is what we're trying to do here. Out of time, though. Joe Collins, thank you so much. Rebecca Walzer, Rick Green, stick around. More to cover.
Yeah, we're talking about this.